When power became overwhelming, there are wars that are remembered for their brutality, wars that are remembered for their strategy, and then there are wars so overwhelmingly one-sided that they almost feel unreal. Conflicts where one army marched in with confidence and left in ruins. Battles where the outcome was never truly in doubt. Moments in history where technology, discipline, deception, or sheer force turned war into something closer to annihilation than combat. Tonight, we are not looking at evenly matched rivals. We are looking at domination. At moments when one side didn't just win, they erased opposition. One of the earliest and most dramatic examples begins in 331 BC, under the blazing sun of Mesopotamia, at the Battle of Gaugamela. On one side stood the massive Persian Empire led by King Darius III. His army was enormous, possibly over 100,000 soldiers, including cavalry, infantry, chariots fitted with scythes, and elite royal guards. He had chosen the battlefield carefully, flattening the terrain to maximize the effectiveness of his cavalry and deadly chariots. He believed numbers would crush resistance. Facing him was a much smaller but disciplined Macedonian army led by Alexander the Great. Alexander commanded roughly 40,000 infantry and 7,000 cavalry, vastly outnumbered. But what he lacked in numbers, he possessed in tactical brilliance. Instead of attacking head-on, Alexander executed a diagonal advance, stretching the Persian lines and forcing Darius to react. Then, in a moment that would echo through history, Alexander saw a gap open in the Persian center. He charged directly at Darius himself. The Persian king panicked. Believing he was about to be captured or killed, Darius fled the battlefield. And when the king ran, the army collapsed. What began as a balanced clash turned into a catastrophic rout. Tens of thousands of Persian soldiers were slaughtered. The Macedonian losses were minimal in comparison. In a single day, the Persian Empire, one of the greatest superpowers on earth, was effectively broken. It wasn't just a victory. It was a dismantling. But ancient history was not the only era to witness overwhelming domination. Fast forward nearly 2,000 years to 1526, to the First Battle of Panipat. The mighty Delhi Sultanate faced the invading forces of Babur, the founder of the Mughal Empire. The Sultan Ibrahim Lodi had perhaps 100,000 troops and nearly 1,000 war elephants. Babur, around 15,000 men. On paper, it should have been suicide. But Babur brought something new to the Indian battlefield: field artillery and matchlock firearms. Using Ottoman-inspired tactics, he chained carts together to create defensive barriers and positioned cannons between them. When Lodi's massive army advanced in traditional formation, they were met with thunder. Cannons roared, smoke filled the air, war elephants panicked at the sound of explosions. Chaos spread instantly. Within hours, the Sultan was dead. His army disintegrated. What looked like an overwhelming advantage turned into one of the most lopsided defeats in South Asian history. The Mughal Empire was born not from numbers, but from technological superiority and strategic innovation. This was the beginning of a new kind of warfare on the subcontinent. A lesson written in fire and iron. Centuries later, technology would again create one-sided devastation, but this time on an industrial scale. In 1898, during the Battle of Omdurman in Sudan, British forces under General Herbert Kitchener faced the Mahdist army. The Mahdists had around 50,000 warriors, courageous, determined, and armed mostly with rifles, spears, and swords. The British had roughly 8,000 troops, equipped with modern rifles, artillery, and one weapon that would redefine slaughter: the Maxim machine gun. As waves of Mahdist fighters charged across open ground, British machine guns opened fire. The Maxim could fire 600 rounds per minute. Entire lines of attackers fell within seconds. The battlefield became a killing field. By the end of the battle, approximately 10,000 Mahdist soldiers were dead. British losses: around 50. It was not a battle in the traditional sense. It was industrialized dominance. Winston Churchill, who was present at Omdurman, later described it as the most signal triumph ever gained by the arms of science over barbarians. The technological gap was simply too vast. Courage alone could not overcome machine guns. And then there was the Pacific in 1944. The Battle of the Philippine Sea during World War II would become known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. By this point, the United States Navy had perfected carrier-based warfare. Radar-guided fighters, experienced pilots, coordinated fleets, it was a machine of precision. Facing them was the Imperial Japanese Navy, already weakened from earlier losses but still determined to strike back. Over 2 days, Japanese aircraft launched wave after wave of attacks. American radar detected them early. Fighters intercepted them far from the fleet. The result was devastating. The US shot down approximately 600 Japanese aircraft while losing fewer than 130 of their own. Japan's carrier aviation arm, the core of its naval power, was effectively destroyed in a single engagement. It was no longer 1941. The balance of power had shifted permanently. But sometimes, the most shocking one-sided wars are the shortest. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel faced a coalition of neighboring Arab states including Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. Surrounded and heavily outnumbered, Israel launched a preemptive strike. In a single morning, Israeli jets destroyed nearly the entire Egyptian air force while it sat on the ground. Within days, Israeli forces captured the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. 6 days. That was all it took to redraw the map of the Middle East. One-sided wars are rarely about simple strength. They are about surprise, preparation, innovation, leadership, timing. They are moments when one side understands the future of warfare, and the other is still fighting the past. And yet, history holds even more brutal examples. Wars where entire armies vanished in hours. Where empires collapsed almost overnight. Where the illusion of balance shattered instantly. The illusion of strength. History has a cruel sense of irony. The most devastating defeats often come to those who believe they cannot possibly lose. Empires collapse not when they are weak, but when they are overconfident. Generals miscalculate. Leaders underestimate. Armies march forward convinced of victory, only to discover that the battlefield has already chosen a different outcome. In this chapter, we explore wars and battles where the illusion of strength shattered in moments, where power proved hollow, and where defeat came faster than anyone imagined. In 1805, Europe trembled before the might of Napoleon Bonaparte. His Grande Armée was considered the most formidable military force on earth. Yet while Napoleon dominated land warfare, the British Empire controlled the seas. That difference would define the outcome of the Battle of Trafalgar. The British fleet, commanded by Horatio Nelson, faced a combined French and Spanish navy off the coast of Spain. On paper, the fleets were relatively comparable in size. But tactics made the difference. Instead of following traditional naval formations, Nelson divided his fleet into 2 columns and sailed directly into the enemy line, breaking it apart and creating chaos at close range. The result was devastating. The British captured or destroyed 22 enemy ships without losing a single one of their own. Nelson was killed during the battle, but his strategy ensured British naval dominance for more than a century. The illusion that France and Spain could challenge British sea power vanished in a single day. From that moment on, the oceans belonged to Britain. But sometimes, the illusion of strength collapses not because of tactics, but because of technological revolution. In 1939, the world watched as Germany invaded Poland. Poland had a respectable army, brave soldiers, and defensive plans. What it did not have was Blitzkrieg. Germany unleashed coordinated attacks using tanks, mechanized infantry, and close air support from the Luftwaffe. Communication systems allowed rapid movement and flexibility that traditional armies could not match. Polish forces fought fiercely, but they were overwhelmed. Within weeks, Poland collapsed. The speed shocked the world. The idea of long, static trench warfare, like in World War I, was replaced by lightning war. It was not simply a defeat, it was a demonstration of modern mechanized warfare. The balance of Europe shifted almost overnight. And yet, some of the most humiliating one-sided defeats occurred far from Europe. In 1885, the Russian Baltic Fleet set sail for the Far East during the Russo-Japanese War. Russia believed Japan was inferior, militarily and industrially. That assumption would prove fatal. At the Battle of Tsushima in 1905, the Japanese fleet under Togo Heihachiro intercepted the exhausted Russian ships after their 18,000-mile journey. The Japanese navy was faster, better trained, and tactically superior. Using wireless communication and precise gunnery, Japan annihilated the Russian fleet. Of 38 Russian ships, 21 were sunk and 7 captured. Japan lost only 3 torpedo boats. It was the first time in modern history that an Asian power had decisively defeated a European empire. The psychological impact was enormous. Russia's illusion of superiority evaporated in smoke rising from its shattered fleet. The world realized something had changed. Fast forward to 1991. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, its military was one of the largest in the world. Battle-hardened from years of war with Iran, Iraqi forces were dug into defensive positions across the desert. Saddam Hussein believed the coalition would suffer massive casualties attempting to dislodge them. Instead, Operation Desert Storm began. The coalition, led by United States, launched weeks of precision airstrikes. Stealth aircraft, satellite guidance, cruise missiles, it was a level of technology unseen before in warfare. Iraqi radar installations were destroyed within hours. Communication lines were severed. Armored units were bombed relentlessly from above. When the ground invasion finally began, it lasted just 100 hours. Coalition forces swept through Iraqi positions with overwhelming speed. Tanks equipped with thermal imaging engaged Iraqi armor long before being seen. The so-called highway of death became a grim symbol of the imbalance. The Iraqi army, once feared, crumbled. The war demonstrated the terrifying gap between a modern, technologically advanced military and one relying on outdated systems. It was not simply victory. It was dominance through information, coordination, and air supremacy. But sometimes, one-sided wars are not defined by advanced weapons, but by intelligence failures. In 1941, Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, invading the Soviet Union. Initially, it seemed one-sided in Germany's favor. Soviet forces were unprepared, disorganized, and overwhelmed. Entire divisions were encircled and destroyed. Millions of Soviet soldiers were captured in the early months. Yet Germany had miscalculated the scale, resilience, and industrial capacity of the Soviet Union. The illusion of quick victory faded as winter arrived. What began as a one-sided invasion turned into one of the bloodiest and longest wars in history. It is a reminder that some illusions of strength do not collapse immediately, but slowly, painfully, over time. And that is the true lesson of one-sided wars. They are not accidents. They are moments when preparation meets opportunity, when innovation meets arrogance, when one side understands the battlefield better than the other. Sometimes the imbalance is technological. Sometimes it is strategic. Sometimes it is psychological. But in every case, the result is the same. Speed, shock, collapse. From the plains of Gaugamela to the deserts of Kuwait, from the cannons of Panipat to the machine guns of Omdurman, from Trafalgar's waves to Tsushima's burning ships, history has shown us that wars are not always contests of equals. Sometimes, they are statements. Statements that an era has ended. Statements that the future belongs to those who adapt. And statements that overconfidence is the most dangerous weapon of all. Because the most one-sided wars in history were not just about victory. They were about transformation. They marked the moment when the world realized the rules had changed forever.